Welcome back to the Daily Rundown with me, Dan Morfitt, and my guests, Wendy, Olsen and AJ Hill. A new survey has found that eating disorders are as much of a problem for UK secondary school boys as they are for girls. Of the 1,000 8 to 18-year-old boys polled, 55% would consider changing their diet to look better. 23% said that they believed that 23% said they believed there was a perfect male body, and 56% saw eating disorders as an issue for both boys and girls. Despite this pressure, boys found it hard to discuss their concerns. 56% struggled to talk to teachers. A spokesperson for the Credos think tank said the low awareness of boys' body image issues makes it a tough environment for boys to seek support. So is this surprising?
Not at all.
I think it's very interesting about how hard it is to talk about it. Like, there's a lot of things in life that we find really hard to raise and verbalize. And then if we did verbalize it, then it would be remembered, and then you'd have to have the implications of it. And actually, it's because it's so difficult to control your diet that I think people don't want to talk about it, because they might get caught out promising something that they can't actually deliver. I mean, most people have had the experience of trying to go vegetarian or somehow stop eating sugar and then failing to change their diet, because those are really ingrained habits. Somebody said to me once, why don't you try and hijack your habits? And the only way to hijack them is to catch yourself at the very beginning of an action and ask, is that really what I want to do? So say having sugar in my coffee.
Well, the thing is, it is what you want to do, though. That's the point about...
That's exactly it.
That's the thing about sugars and things. We're naturally...
We really love
them.
to eat.
With this, though, about boys' body image, are we close to losing generations of young men because they're getting the same hang-ups that women have always been perceived to have had?
I think it's increasing. I mean, I have a physical impairment, so I don't live up to that, archetypal Adonis body, and it's something that I've always been self-conscious of myself. But I used to live with a man who had anorexia, so he believed that having any amount of fat on him was just dreadful, and he'd not eat for days, or he once spent a week just eating nothing but apples. Like, he'd set himself these weird challenges to sort of try and beat his own physiology into doing what he wanted it to do. And I think
which is partly just an act of having control over yourself.
Well, he didn't have a lot of control over anything else in his life, unfortunately.
Right.
But I think that with the loss of patriarchy, we'll use that term, so having a more egalitarian society, that the male role has been changing significantly. And I think that especially young men growing up in that environment, which is far more acute and, far more, they're far more aware of the fact that the old gender roles are less defined as they were. I think it's a big issue.
A mentor, without a role model for some boys between 8 to 18 especially, they can't really talk to anybody about those hang-ups that they might be feeling.
Well, I mean, back in the day, you were supposed to be a cowboy that smoked cigarettes. That was what you were supposed to be, and we're not allowed to smoke anymore. And
do you think the problem is now, boys are now given this image of, topless men on like men's fitness magazines and things?
Well, it's not fitness magazines. You've got pornography. Let's not beat around the bush here. You've got pornography, which is just full of very physically attractive men, and we know for a fact that younger and younger people of all genders are watching pornography, and that's, I guess, what they're going to always assume the generic body type should be. I think it's a hideous
especially
thing
with what they're doing, obviously, in pornography. It's like, that's the body image, therefore I need to be like that to be able to do that.
Well, exactly.
What about if we took a sort of multicultural approach to this one and thought about whether it was a sort of Western problem? Because I've traveled a lot, and the impression I've had in Mexico, Netherlands, India, is that people just belong, and they just go to all the events of their family because everybody belongs, and they're starting to be affected by this image thing and appearances and all. But actually, they sort of belong at such a deep level in all these habits and traditions that they have, that they do together, and they have roles. So they have roles like younger brother role. There's one holiday in India, for example, where the sister goes to the brother and ties a little bracelet on his arm to celebrate him being her brother, and he wears that for a few weeks, and he ties one on her, and in doing those things, they're not thinking about how they look at all.
So more than anything, are you saying that this is a Western societal problem?
I think it's the West that's so individualized, so that we can only belong if we're a good individual.
Well, the other thing to think about as well is it's talking about people wanting to diet. Now, obviously, here in the UK, we're a nation of porkers, aren't we? Eh?
The biscuits and cakes.
Well, exactly. So I'm saying that
every day they're everywhere.
So even with childhood obesity, we've got a much higher rate of childhood obesity than other countries round and about.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think therefore that's another reason why young men and young women would be more conscious about their weight, possibly because unfortunately our diets aren't fantastic. They're not very good for us.
I think one thing that this report does highlight, though, is that we shouldn't forget boys as well as girls growing up.
Yeah.
And there's
Sure.
many problems happening in people's lives that, if society wasn't so harsh on people, we'd all get along a little bit better.
Yeah.
You're all beautiful, folks. You're all beautiful.
Everybody belongs.
It's lovely. Moving on to our next story now. UK-based drug dealers earn more money online than any of their European rivals.
Good.
I was waiting for that. His opinion. In January, British dealers made $2.2 million, that's £1.7 million, in web sales, with a 16% share of the global online drugs market. Commissioned by the Netherlands government, Rand Europe trawled the 8 largest drug marketplaces on the dark web. These online shopping sites can only be accessed using a specialised web browser and do not show up in mainstream search engine results. Now, the Rand Europe reports found that the number of drug deals taking place on the dark web had tripled since 2013, when the police closed the US Silk Road website, one of the first online drug marketplaces. So how do we feel about this?
Why isn't the government discussing this in a positive light? Look at that economic growth.
Entrepreneurs. Doing such a good job.
We're beating other countries in something
money,
financially.
money.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Keep up the good
Economic
work,
growth.
guys.
AJ, that's your opinion. You can stick by that, but it doesn't necessarily represent the views of the Daily Rundown. Okay, so...
You know what I'm going to say, Dan?
Go on.
Because I'm agreeing. So I'm going to say legalize the use of cannabis. Now, a lot of people misunderstand this. A lot of people think that we say decriminalize the whole thing. But no, this would become a criminal act, this selling it on the dark web. And what we say should happen is the users shouldn't be arrested. They should move toward not criminalizing a user, but the traders have to be registered. So to register all the traders would mean you'd be sure of what you were getting. It would undercut the price. Only cannabis would be decriminalized, and then the other things would be made as a crime. But the demand can float toward these legitimate
bring
outlets.
through a licensing system.
Yeah.
I believe it's been decriminalised completely in Portugal,
Yeah.
where
Yep.
the end user
Cannabis.
Cannabis, yeah.
Yeah, but not the other ones.
And in America, it's becoming widespread the use of medical marijuana and
Yeah.
legalised marijuana in certain states.
That's
it's
right.
bringing in tax dollars.
So when you say decriminalize completely, let's just be clear. We don't mean decriminalizing the sale of it. I mean, and that's not a crime as long as you're registered. But if somebody wants to sell stuff that hasn't been registered or sell it on the street, then that's not going to be legal.
Surely this war on drugs isn't helping because it is turning it towards the dark web.
But think about it this way, right? I know I was joking before about how fantastic it is, but there is actually a positive side to things going online, which isn't going to get talked about, which is very simply, when I was in university, a lot of my friends, they would go to dodgy men that they would meet in the street in cars. I had female friends who would get into a car with complete strangers and drive around the block to pick up substances, naughty substances. That's frightful. These are people that they're getting into vehicles with complete strangers, sometimes multiple strangers in one car, and they're driving off. So physically, this is a lot safer in some respects.
It's a safer transaction.
It's a safer transaction.
I have to say we had a lot of trouble along those lines in Salford at one point. Apparently the taxi drivers would be made to host the deal.
Yeah.
So the taxi driver would be told, okay, I'm going to such and such a corner and you're going to drive me back again when I've done this act, say the selling act. And the taxi driver was practically a hostage. Now this is long
You're
gone.
criminalising their activity against their will.
Criminalising a whole range of people. What about the people that live with someone who's a drug dealer? It's terrible for them.
Well, neighbourhoods as well. So neighbourhoods, obviously, you get drug dealers out on street corners and things like that. At least this is taking that element away from the visible environment of people's living.
It sounds
areas.
like a crackpot argument, but it actually does make sense. If you think about how online shopping has revolutionised the high streets, for good or bad, if it's doing that for illegal drug dealing, surely if we go to some level of legalising, decriminalising on some extent, then we can use this process again. There's got to be some good people that are good at coding, good at using the dark web
Yeah, I
that
mean,
the government could use.
Yeah,
Well,
the
let's-
security services can crack into the dark web. You know, as new things
can.
develop and emerge, they can find them and locate them. And so if something's being done that's illegal there, they can usually track it down eventually.
And that's how Silk Road got shut down.
Yeah.
Well, it also makes it harder for children to buy drugs as well. It's not easy for a child to buy drugs because, you know, I personally don't know how to use a dark web. I'm guessing there's lots of people who wouldn't know how to access it. You have to have certain things. To buy drugs, you need your own bank account. Now, I know people could steal their parents' cards and things like that, but if you're paying for everything in cash, it's much easier for a child to get hold of drugs at a much younger age than it is when it's all online. So there are, unfortunately, positive.
But what do you guys think about the idea that it might be better, instead of spending money on the security services having to track down all these criminals, and the security services do some very sneaky things, you know, like these sting operations. They're quite shady.
Well, I think the war on
why
drugs
don't we
is a
spend
waste
the
of
money
time.
on registering and managing and licensing the whole flow of these particular,
you know
the
what?
milder forms of drugs?
We're going to have to leave that argument for other nights because the Daily Rundown can't solve everything, even though we try. Right, it's time for another break now, so go and make that trip to the smallest room in the house, or send that Facebook message you've been gagging to do for ages. And we'll see you in a couple of minutes' time with news of sexism in the workplace. And prepare yourself for Trump! Loads more to come on the Daily Rundown after the break here on Channel 7.